There were quite a number of Formula 1 games that were released on the PlayStation during its lifespan, many of which would date all the way back to the early years of the PlayStation itself from 1995-1996 with the original Formula 1 by Psygnosis. But after that you would get a lot of other interesting titles, both arcade experiences and more simulation focused elements that would be developed under different brands and companies, each wanting to cash in on the success of the known sport. Not all of the experiences though had access to all of the licensed teams and individual drivers, some of which they had to use makeshift names and so forth. Kind of like what Konami would have to do with the likes of the ISS Pro series, as they didn't have access to all of the team names and players, so they'd have to make up their own categories. But still, it was enough of a formula to give people an idea of what to expect, as they also tried to capitalise on the success of the iconic F1 name. So it would be of no surprise to see Electronic Arts gain license to the Formula 1 games for a period beginning in the early 2000s that would go under the EA Sports brand, and one of the first games on the list to be released on the PlayStation and other consoles would be F1 Championship Season 2000. There would also be Formula 1 2000, which again would be under the same category, also released by EA in and around the same time, but this one tried to focus a bit more on simulation aspects compared to the all-out racing of the other title. But in saying that, this game still allowed you to race under all of the championship aesthetics and elements from within the 2000 season also. So this game got a release not just on the PlayStation but on the Windows PC, Game Boy Color. It even got a release on the Mac OS system and even later on the PlayStation 2, being one of the earliest games to be released on the new console at the time. And this game would give you access to all of the known brands, licensed characters, drivers, even some of the sponsors that the teams would have had back then, but they would remove certain aspects because at that time teams and licenses were starting to remove promotions based off of like alcohol and cigarettes. They were trying to remove them from the likes of teams and sport and so forth. So in this game they would replace a lot of the sponsors with different aspects like either names of the drivers and other types of graphical elements, but they still looked authentic to the original thing. So what does the game play like overall? Well, it does give you access to all of the tracks from the 2000 season. You have all of the legendary drivers, all of the cars, names, brands with Ferrari, Benetton, Renault, you had Jordan, Honda, all of the familiar names that you would remember from that period in time. And on the front of it, the game does look fairly decent. It has some really good graphics, some very detailed and polished graphics, although there would be some other games on the system in terms of the overall visual elements regarding the backgrounds and the environments might have been better in other games, but the detail in the likes of the cars and the sound effects were really good in this game. Plus the handling dynamics were definitely among some of its best features, if not one of the better elements seen in Formula 1 games. But at the same time, it still didn't stop magazines from giving the game mixed reviews at the time, and I think because of a variety of different things, but also noting the fact that there was so many games of this type that had come before it. While there was some that were really good that set the benchmark, but there was some that were obviously not as good, but they all had their place. So by the time this came around, it's like anything else. When you look at the likes of the football games, when you've seen the FIFA games starting to gain traction, the ISS Pros and many other interesting titles, the problem is that every game that came out year after year, it felt like just a production line of similar games constantly being churned out over and over again. And Formula 1 games were no different in that respect. Mind you, they did change hands in terms of licensing from different developers at the time, so you had a different mix and different variety of quality of games, some being really good whilst, like I said, some being not so good. But this kind of falls in the middle of that category. It is good in many ways. If anything, it's probably better in some regards compared to earlier games or the more popular ones with some of the visual elements, but it does fall short in some other areas. But it's not to say that it's a bad game. It is a good solid experience, and it definitely suited the aesthetic it was going for during the early 2000s at that time, as things were changing in the world of motorsport in general.
Is in first place. has retired from the race. There's been a retirement. It's Pedro de la Rosa.
One of the main gripes with this game though is when you're playing on the easier modes, it does give you access to different assist options, like from steering assist to braking assist, overall speed and a few other elements. The problem is that if you turn all of them on at the same time, now I don't know whether it's a glitch or not, but it takes complete control over the car almost to a point that you have very little to do in the race itself. Like the computer will control the car around the corners, it will brake for you automatically. Literally all you have to do is hold on to is the accelerator button to drive the car, and that's it. The downside with that, even though that sounds good, the problem is that because it's controlled by the AI, it always tries to stay onto the racing line. And the main problem with that is that you also have other drivers and competitors and racers also driving on the same line. So when you're trying to overtake them, it's almost impossible, because when you try to move out to try and get them on a slipstream, it won't really let you, because it tries to pull you back into the racing line all of the time, which always ends up with you smashing into the back of an opponent in front of you, and you nearly have to barge them out of the way just to get past them. So in most respects you would nearly have to turn the steering assist off to really get the best elements from the game, because it can be very annoying. As you can see on screen here, I'm constantly having to fight with the steering assist as it's very jarring, and it can be quite annoying. While for a beginner coming into this game that's never played it before, it's ideal, but for those that want a bit more of a challenge, you will literally have to turn it off because it will drive you crazy. You can win races with it, but you won't be able to win them in the most authentic way, because you will crash into everybody just to get past them. So it will drive you mad in that sense. But the one thing like I can take from it, because when I look back, my youngest brother had a load of Formula 1 games on the PlayStation, and mind you, he was a big Formula 1 fanatic, as I was back then too. We had Formula 1, Formula 1 97, Formula 1 99, and we had a few other games as well. And that was one of the last Formula 1 games that we had on the system before we eventually moved on to the likes of the PlayStation 2. Now I enjoyed that game, I thought it was really cool. If anything, what I enjoyed of it the most was the camera settings in terms of the position where the camera was. I always found the likes of the in-car or cockpit views to be one of the best of the Formula 1 games on the system. I thought it was definitely one of the most detailed in-car views of any game on the console in that respect. It just felt very authentic and felt very lifelike for its time, because it really did have good visuals in terms of the textures and just the overall animations of the car, even with the wheels spinning, how the steering wheel is moving, and you can feel all the lumps and bumps on the road because the car is so low to the ground. So for its time, that was definitely for me one of the best aspects of it. And Formula 1 Championship Season 2000 is exactly the same as the other game, as I mentioned. It has all of those aspects in abundance, but there are, like I said, a few subtle gripes with some of the gameplay features, but realistically it's still one of the more solid racing games on the system. It has a good balance between arcade and simulation focused elements. Now you'll have to change out the different settings in order to achieve your desired results, but that's up to you at the end of the day. But I definitely think it's one of the better racers on the system, and it's definitely one of the better Formula 1 games. Now we did have the likes of earlier Formula 1 games way back on the PlayStation from Psygnosis, and they really did set the benchmark, so everything that came after it had to be as good if not better, which was, to be honest, was a very hard thing to do back then, because those games were so, especially the first two games with Formula 1 and Formula 1 97, they were so authentic for their time. There was very little comparison or even competition out there of any games that could even compete with them during that time. The only games that managed to capture that would have been games that would have been seen on the likes of the PC, as they had more of these type of games available, and they were definitely able to add a lot more, but not everybody had a PC, so the only other alternative was to play these games on the PlayStation. But luckily enough, we had more than enough games at our disposal that we could pick and choose from to give us different experiences. Some good, some not so good, and some excellent, but it really just depends on your own preferences or what what you had available to you at that time. So I do think that this is a solid racer. Yeah, it's not the best racer on the system by any means, but it's a good solid F1 experience to be had, in all fairness to it. But I would love to know your thoughts of this game if you have played it yourself, or did you even play it on the PlayStation 2 version? So I'd love to know whatever stories you do have of the game, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other Formula 1 games like this that were also released on the PlayStation back in the day, then you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.